Commission members. Okay, Tony Williams,
Here.
Hassan Bernard, here.
Here.
David Catania,
Here.
here. James Hudson. Glenn Lee.
Here.
Gregory McCarthy.
Here.
Jody McLean.
She's coming, I know, but not here.
Carolyn Rudd.
Present.
Yeshem Sayan.
Here.
Erica Williams.
Here.
Shad Young.
Okay.
Not Susan yet. That is a quorum.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, I'll turn it over to our esteemed director to take us through our agenda.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. Good to see you all. We are now streaming on YouTube, right? As well as and we have 4 colleagues on Zoom. Guys, holler if you can't. We got feedback issues.
CFO's already done, work other tax commissions already done, other economists already done, and really just applying it to the facts here, and where are we really going to be doing research that's really going to be time, not that the other isn't time consuming, but research that's particularly time consuming where it really is original primary. And maybe Erica or Yeshim, you could chime in too.
Yeah, do you guys want to take that? Because that was something you guys articulated to some extent in your research agenda. And then I can say how I reflected that just now.
I'll take a shot at it, and Erica, please stop me or add on as you find appropriate. I think what we focused on was to bring a number of scholars who have really thought deeply about tax policy, especially focusing on what happened since the pandemic, the race riots, stuff that happened in the last 2-3 years. We didn't think that these were worthy of actual papers, but that they can come and share with us their research and the salient parts of tax policy we should be focusing on. That being said, we are actually thinking of commissioning research, which goes back to the question that you have raised, Tony, is about if we don't have the goal or the restriction of having recommendations that are revenue neutral, then what is our anchor? And that anchor has to be like some sort of need for spending or something like that. So I think in the research plan, there is opportunity for us to ask Urban Institute, at least, or some other entity that along the lines of David is recommending, how should we think about that expenditure need? Not maybe in detail, but in terms of sort of providing an anchor for this commission to base its recommendations on. Erica, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I'd add is that we wanted to start, to your point, Mayor Williams, with the things that we kind of know and already have on hand. And I think that's what you see there with the series of short policy backgrounders. It's sort of drawing on what's already been done, and the depth of analysis that the CFO's office already has on hand, but in a way that's a little bit easier to digest in a short amount of time. And then as we're having conversations with experts across different sort of thematic areas when it comes to tax policy and also different tax policy issues, that there may be questions that come up that then we feel need to be answered and where we want to commission research based on the conversations we're having. And so I think we want to leave some of that a little bit open, and not sort of, pretend like we know all the questions we're going to want to ask right now, because there may be things that come up that we want to do some research on a little bit later down the road.
Yeah, I would agree. So if you look under planned work products in this document, that's exactly what this shows. A series of short backgrounders, and when I say short, I'm thinking 2-pagers, with, of course, with hyperlinks for more research to because so much has already been done, including some of the work of the last tax commission, both on the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of tax policies and then some different analytic perspectives. Some of those analytic perspectives in turn connect to some of the expert briefings that we would like to schedule. Again, not to have experts come and talk about new research that we've connected, but to have experts come and talk about areas of work that they've already done, that they are already expert in a sort of panel discussion sort of format. So a series of 2-pagers, and then a couple of the two big research papers. One, Yeshim just alluded to, this baseline fiscal analysis, to talk about what are the drivers of spending growth in the district, because if we want to think about how much money we need a tax system to raise a certain amount of money in the future. We want to think about what our baseline is for that. We could think about, well, how much is the current tax system likely to raise, and that's one very reasonable baseline. But another might be, how much does the current set of spending priorities, how much would that cost to continue sort of a current services baseline into the future?
Your 2-pagers be sort of this competitiveness as compared to the broader DMV?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's regional tax comparisons and economic competition.
And I think we need to include not just tax, but regulations too. for businesses?
Mayor Williams,
Yes, sir.
just to, not to make too fine a point of it, but our baseline expectations of revenue needed is a function of how dependent our current and future population is based on the level of opportunities they have. If we create an environment where there is more opportunity and where people are able to make their own way, the level of funds needed will be less. So I'm just going to be a one-note Johnny a bit on the notion that we need to spend as much time trying to create wealth as we do trying to redistribute it. And maybe, it's an obnoxious point, but I think we cannot assume baseline appropriations unless we are assuming a baseline level of dependency. Does that make sense? The more opportunity, perhaps the less is needed. And unless we create that wealth, then maybe we're right. We need to budget for a certain level of the consequences of lack of opportunity and dependency.
No, my own views, I think that all of us understand we're balancing, efficiency, economic opportunity, empowerment with equity. I mean, that's tension in our society, and that by nature of the Tax Revision Commission, what we have to do.
I understand. And what I'm just trying to be is to add that other element, the balance there, that things don't have to be this way if we do A, B, C, or D. That's all there. Not militantly, just that there is another side. That's all.
I think one thing we could do in the baseline fiscal analysis is we could, any baseline has risk, has uncertainty, right? So there's different directions things could go. We also could hit another recession. There are a number of levels of uncertainty, so we could potentially incorporate into our analysis some variables. On the regulation, the competitiveness and regulation part, I would just say that's not my area of expertise, and I totally hear you that it's really important to businesses. I think I would put the question on the table for this commission about sort of, is that, do you want us to dig into that? Because that could be a whole other thing that arguably is, I don't know, is that really part of this commission? Is my question. I'm your
I'll speak
research
for myself. I feel like very much that it is. It is so easy watching this, and we're seeing it happen, for businesses to relocate right over the bridge, for our residents to relocate right over the bridge. It's easy access to the city. And I think we miss when we don't talk about regulation. It is so tough here to be a business that I think if all we're looking at is just sort of revenues without looking at competitiveness and without regulation. Personally, I think we're missing a big part of it. But I'll just speak for myself.
And as a
The
business
first
owner and
advantage-
chair of the DC Chamber of Commerce, I would agree totally with you that we do need to look at regulations a part of this commission's role. Because it does have a direct impact on taxes.
I would just ask that we try and narrow in on where there's an intersection with tax policy. We are the Tax Revision Commission, so, there's a lot of, I think, business regulation that falls outside of that, and that just, I think, even if we came up with regulation or proposals, if we have the wherewithal to do that, I'm not sure those would be taken very seriously since we're here and have sort of been appointed to look at tax policy and implementation. But we did talk, I thought, at a working group meeting earlier on about maybe that could come up in some of the conversation around tax administration and implementation, to the extent that there's an intersection there.
I do think it's a function, I'm sorry, Eric, I do think there is a direct relationship between regulations and taxes. And part of the Tax Revision Commission, part of our charge is to look at how we maximize, how we raise revenue. And I have to say, there is an exact intersection between regulations and the amount of taxes we collect. So maybe a way to thread the needle is to look at, if I might, Rahm Emanuel did something very interesting in Chicago. I mean, under the notion that complex things get more complex with time, that we are a super complex entity that makes it hard for people just to show up and do business. Rahm Emanuel created essentially an innovation exception that allowed, his director of business affairs and consumer protection to waive all regulations of all manner in an effort to expedite a certain activity. Now, there were health, safety, and welfare concerns that had to be considered too, but it was literally like a hot knife through butter. And there's a great recent illustration where Chicago's been able to embrace some very exciting technologies, especially in the autonomous vehicle space. We speak of Vision Zero, et cetera, by virtue of being able to cut through the foolishness. And so maybe there's a middle ground on how we offer an opportunity to accelerate, and then we see the impact on revenue. But anyway, just a thought. Sorry.
How is the baseline fiscal analysis differ from the CFO's 5-year financial plan?
So as I understand it, the CFO's current plan, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, does not take into account all the possible spending drivers of spending in the district.
May I speak to that?
Yeah. You probably know that maybe.
And this is all with trying to be a generalist here and not critical of the process. But the district, we have to adopt a balanced budget, as you know, that goes through a 4-year plan period. So when we look at the financial plan, the folks at the budget office take out all sorts of one-time spending that's required by law, even though in most cases that one-time spending comes back over and over and over again. So there is no way on earth you look at a 4-year financial plan and see it's unbalanced, or it'll be exactly $50 million below the revenue, if not exactly, but somewhere there. But I think we should be looking at drivers that are beyond the usual budgets, things like inflation, healthcare costs, there's population needs, there is housing needs, and things like that. And I think an expenditure analysis that's at a very high level, like a representative revenue and expenditure model that looks into those things, may be more realistic for us.
For how many years out would that analysis be?
It's a really good question. I mean, I don't think we can do it with a great amount of reliability beyond 4 or 5 years.
I think, just to add to the discussion, because we're talking about regulation, I think that there was pushback about let me just say this, there was pushback about talking about performance metrics as part of the commission. I don't want to put you on the spot, Mr. CFO, but we were talking the other day, and he's committed that the CFO's office is really going to work on activity-based costing of a suite of certain metrics by the government. Not maybe over this period, but you're going to.
Yeah, I mean, we're implementing a very powerful financial tool that allows us to aggregate costs in a more sophisticated way. What we're not aggregating is actual outputs of programs. That's beyond our scope. But it's certainly my last assignment or my last job, we did that. We, as this jurisdiction is doing, created the ability to look at aggregations based on program rather than by line item or something like that. And so we are developing a really good capacity over time to be able to assess those things. Now, we just literally implemented yesterday, so it'll take a while to have real data. And certainly, I don't think anything's terribly useful until the year's over with, so we can see what a year looks like in the new framework. But my understanding is that we can be more sophisticated in at least aggregating costs along program lines than we have before, in far more flexible ways.
But bottom line is, you could do that on the CFO's dime, and we don't have to do that, so that's good. But I would echo the views on regulation. I think that if one of our issues is weighing competitiveness with equity and other concerns, we really can't talk about the district's competitiveness for investors and businesses, the sensitivity of taxes, unless we talk about regulations. Because if I decide, arguably, I'm not going to be in the district, it's not just going to be taxes, it's not just going to be regulation, it's going to be the whole package. And it's not even going to be regulation. A lot of times it's not just the regulation, but how long it takes to decide what the regulation is. And like DCRA said, you'll tell you week 1, one answer, and week 2, another answer, and week 4, a different answer. All that goes into, competitiveness. So I think that, we have to consider that.
Is there a way to narrow that scope? So for example, regulations regarding employment, that is a little bit easier to cost. I'm thinking in terms of minimum staffing requirements some jurisdictions have, or mandatory sick leave capacity. Is there a way that businesses can demonstrate pretty clearly it's adding 10%, 15% to our wage bill or not? That's a way to narrow the scope. Can we identify particular kinds of effects that, and then back into what regulation affects those or causes those effects?
I think that is probably a good way to look at it. I don't think it's as limited as just to employment, but yes,
Yeah,
I think I don't want to think through it, but I understand through what Erica was saying, and I just think you have to look at it because it is a cost of doing business here.
Right.
It's almost like a tax. But yeah, I do think there's like 3 or 4 buckets we could say, here are the regulations to look at.
So to go beyond employment,
You're
I've
right.
heard in multiple jurisdictions a concern about parking requirements for new development. I'm not familiar with the regime here, but in some jurisdictions, it adds substantially to the cost of creating new physical plant, whatever that is.
Yeah, I would want to think that too,
But I'm just giving you an example of where that's not a labor-driven matter, but rather capital construction.
I think another concern here in DC is what makes it's very difficult to develop and construct things and costlier to do so, because ultimately our number one product here is space. And from the complaints, at least I hear, is not just the permitting process and all of that stuff, which adds uncertainty and time and therefore costs money, but also environment, like green building laws and things like that. And obviously, we have these regulations because we believe there is at least some sort of benefit from them. I think the tricky part is what parts of these things are truly beneficial or meet the stated goals, and what parts of them are purely driving costs without any corresponding public health, environmental, whatever benefits we think that they should be delivering. That's a very sticky problem and a difficult thing to estimate, but it does have a real cost on economic activity, and therefore it does limit the tax base.
Yeah, Gregory.
One more question on the fiscal analysis. I suppose the answer is we'll address this if and when we get to that point, but in the event that our multi-year basic expenditure baseline is here and our tax revenue forecast is here, would we feel as a commission that we would make recommendations to close the gap, or would we just put out whatever we think at that point? In other words, if we're comparing revenue to expenditures, and we're comparing a gap, do we feel compelled to close the gap either through recommendations on expenditures like we talked about last time, or revenue? Is that a value that we take to the end proposition here?
I mean, that's a really good question. We're already there, right? Our budget and financial plan relies on $2.4 billion of one-time money, federal dollars and one-time use. Now, we always have one-time use in our budget because the revenue estimates are conservative, so the expectation is that they'll go up through the fiscal year and close some of the gap, as is happened in the estimates that were released just a few days ago. But we've never seen such a gap where the fourth year of revenues are $300 million below expenditures. So we're already there with or without this commission.
Well, great. When I think some early information we had maybe the first meeting indicated what real estate market was, commercial real estate market, that we were seeing few collection, few evaluation in that market.
We can't really hear Jim. Jim, I wonder if you can lean forward and talk into a mic for us.
Mike's way over here, unfortunately, those mics are.
Is that the only one?
Yeah, for the Zoom.
That mic's not working?
Yeah, no, it's just this one.
Really? Oh, good job. Do you want to come sit here?
Yeah, we're still working on our technology. So
Those are portable. I mean.
I'll just put a chair behind you.
I don't know if it's connected by Bluetooth, we can move it.
No, no,
No, no, no.
There's a Bluetooth.
No, Jeff, come sit over here at this mic.
Actually, no, you know what? Maybe it is. Maybe it's off.
Speaker. No, it's fine. I'm good.
You sit right where Becky is.
Actually, it's true, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe with the commission budget, we should hire a technician to figure out.
Yeah. No, we're working on it. We'll have.
Jim's voice is so powerful. How it can't be heard.
Sorry to interrupt. Just want to hear what you
No,
have
no,
to say.
that's good.
Thanks,
That's
Erica.
good.
It's very good.
There's a mic, Jim.
Following, this is from Greg's question about the revenue. We had some figures that showed that real estate taxes, which is the principal part of our budget, commercial real estate taxes, there was a trend line that was going down. Now, do we see in a forecast that trend line reversing itself? Because I read these articles about possible conversion of office buildings into residential. Even assuming that happens, the revenue from is nowhere in comparison to what this would receive in terms of taxes. So I think the point being, how do we see that line going, particularly in terms of real estate taxes?
I'll just start. I don't think we feel confident in the trajectory of the economy to have made an assumption about large-scale use changes. I think that's absolutely a risk, from my view. It's may or may not agree, but I think it is. But we're not in a position to guess how that's going to unfold. Is that fair?
And that's correct. And to answer your question, so this year we have the revenues from commercial real estate falling, and we don't have that recovering over the life of the financial plan, if that answers your question.
In part,
As Glenn says, we don't have any reason to believe that it's going to reverse itself by use changes. And as you have said, our rates on residential is more than double. The rates on commercial is more than double what we have on residential. So that wouldn't make up all the revenues unless there's a big mass conversion and we bring lots of people in. But that's not in our estimate, to answer your question.
but I don't know what we do about that, but I'm a little concerned on the basis of our revenue if it's so heavily impacted by commercial real estate and we don't see that recovering. Well, it recovers some, but for instance, at 12th and G, there's a huge foreclosure, 400,000 square foot office building. So that means that's since they can go off the books revenue wise. And they're going to talk about how to revitalize downtown, all about tax incentives to do that, not just raise the question, how do we see that trend line going? And you've answered, we don't know.
So, I mean, I would say that's one of the challenges for the company because we are in a place where we have a pandemic. We have, DC is one of the cities that have a high rate of remote work right through the pandemic and even afterwards. So the question is, we don't really have anything to assess where that's going to end up in the long term. So I think that would be one of the challenges, given where we are on real property tax and our dependence on the commercial real property tax. What should the revenue structure look like post-pandemic? And I think that's one of the questions that we would ask the experts to look at.
I think to add to that, the same kind of uncertainty affects income taxes as well. We have no good way of projecting the population growth. Like it's so hard for cities anyways because you have like it's like estimating the population for Syria. Like in we really don't.
I don't think we do.
No, we actually lost population, but we don't know over the next 4 years. So it's over 10 years.
But I think appropriate, I know this is on the ballot, this is not going to be the council, but we have like this tip wage on the ballot again, right? And it's gonna change how restaurant tours are gonna have to pay their employees. Their employees are today by law, they're minimum wage. It's just a matter of how they're paid. But when that goes into effect, if it's passed, it will run a lot of restaurants out of business here. They will not be able to afford that quick change. But what will also happen is your great talent who works in restaurants is going to go to Northern Virginia where they can work with tip wage, where they can earn those tips, because on average they'll earn $40 to $50 an hour versus what will happen here. And so I think what I worry about is all these progressive changes that are meant very positive. And if we don't keep an eye on Virginia being, and Maryland, I just think to your point, it's going to continue to devalue our real estate. Not only just the revenue, but it will really devalue real estate and how much we're able to contribute to the coffers. So I hear this question about do we look at expenses too? And I don't know that. But what David said kind of rings in my ears. I think we need to figure out how we incentivize wealth creation, how we incentivize people to work here and to create more revenues.
It's helpful.
Yeah, I do.
Other points?
I just, from my vantage point, it's an and proposition. It's not an or proposition. And given the facts, we do have to look at expenses. We have to. And I think where I'm keenly interested is, what tax policies have been exacted around the country with an equity lens that's been efficacious, and what parts of those can we adopt that's palatable enough in the context that we're in, which is declining revenues over the next 4 years. Because if there are policies that have been exacted that we can't adopt, given our current context, not that it's an exercise in futility, but we can't adopt them, right? So it has to be it's an and proposition, and we have to address the issue of equity. We have to. For the long-term sustainability of I'm not talking about next 4 years, next 10 years, next 15 years, next 20 years, we have to address that. So I guess my encouragement is to this group is that we not get myopic on what's ahead of us, given what COVID has done for us, but let's set this system up to thrive for our kids and the kids beyond that. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I just want to chime in and say, we were told from the outset that this package does not need to be revenue neutral, which I think leaves open that we can have something that does raise revenue. And I think, but I agree on not sort of entering this conversation with kind of myopic views about what we're going to need to do. We just talked about having research, analysis, and conversations with experts about how we get to a resilient, strong, sustainable economy that helps us have or tax system that helps us have, a strong, equitable economy that both makes people want to live and work and run their business here, but also supports folks that already are in the district, right? And that we're able to support all of that through our revenue system. And I think we don't need to I don't think we need to decide today what things will and won't get in the way of that, or what direction we're gonna head in the end. I think we have the latitude to sort of go on this learning journey together and, you know, exercise of inquiry to come up with policy proposals. So I feel kind of like every meeting we've had, there's been sort of big statements made about what is, and I think that, you know, there's lots of differences of opinion on some of those things that have been said. But let's dig in to the research and talk to the experts and then come up with our policy ideas.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is I'm not hearing people making conclusions. I'm just hearing people say we've got to weigh both, again, you know, competitiveness and inclusion, efficiency and equity. We need to look at them both, and then, having done thorough research as outlined in this proposal, we'll be able to make decisions. And some of them will be judgments. Maybe we'll never come to agreement on what, you know, the tax drivers of competitiveness or regulatory drivers of competitiveness, but at least we will have done a thorough job and have a basis for decision. I think that's what I think we want to do and what's fair. I think everybody would agree with that, right?
I agree. Yeah.
David, you're on mute.
Yeah, I appreciate that we have to keep an open mind, you know, and that's hard because I, like so many of you, spend too many hours in that beast. There is no jurisdiction in the country that spends more per capita than the district. Not one, not even close. Not close. No one can show me that hemorrhaging money on subject matters in the city produces results. And so to the mayor's earlier point about making sure we're getting value for the dollar, to simply stick up taxpayers because we can, when we don't know or are indifferent to the outcome, seems to be a bit immoral. I have seen what that beast creates with the taxes it gets. If tax expenditures equal prosperity, we would have the most prosperous people in the country, period. And so I'm not one for, and I feel, you know, personally very strongly, I'm not one for simply raising money just because we can. Because, and as far as equity goes, I absolutely want to see the proposals from around the country. I want to see what makes sense, but I want to see it through the lens of what's going to bring people up, not simply redistribute what we have. Thank you.
Okay, so good. Okay, keep on going, Nick.
So the other research paper, which I didn't mention, which came out of the work that Gregory and Norton did, or it was around tax administration. And this is, I think this is a little less fleshed out, but it was clearly, we heard in the last meeting, and then in the research agendas, interest in digging into questions around tax administration. And a couple of questions, specific issues were lifted up. But I think this is another area for de novo research. So that's the other one that's been identified to date. But as Erica mentioned earlier, I think we want to keep keep some space on our agenda for possible additional research. So let's turn to kind of the schedule and the cadence of how this is going to work. So over this, again, this research period, again, 5 months may be ambitious, but we're going to try. I want to suggest, but I'm interested in getting your feedback, that we continue, since we've got it on the books, the first Tuesday of each month, as we've been doing, an in-person commission meeting, including maybe both a brief update on commission business, but we also spent part of that time receiving an expert briefing or discussion, or some kind of public input session. I'll get to what those sessions might look like in a second. And then in addition, because I think we can't only meet once a month if we want to actually get all this done, we schedule a second session. To me, a reasonable thing would be, hey, you know, if this meeting is on the first Tuesday of the month, we do another one on the third Tuesday of the month. And do that one by video call, save people one trip downtown, I think, and that'll also enable us to have experts from around the country zoom in easily. And those will be the expert briefings that are sort of listed below with months, and those are drawn directly from Erica Yesham's memo. In addition, I think we need, again, these public input sessions, and there's two ways to think about it. One is an opportunity for people who have knowledge, who have expertise, as Dave described, to provide their input, to weigh in. And then also some kind of structured opportunity for a wider range of citizens who may not already have preconceived ideas about where taxes should go, but to engage with some of the key questions that we're talking about here. I have to say, I'm still figuring out, I want to talk to other people who have done things like this in different spaces. I'd be interested in your input, exactly how to do these things, particularly the second one. It could be some facilitated meetings where we invite members of the public to be around tables and have a facilitator.
I would like to see us, really be diligent about going out and looking at efforts around the country where they've used, and doesn't necessarily have to be a tax revision commission, but where they've actually been creative and constructive in really using a moment like this to educate the public. Because I think we really can use this opportunity to really educate the citizens of the district. And I'm not saying that in a patronizing way. On the fiscal lay of the land.
Yeah,
Mayor, I agree with that. And the way I look at these expenditures, there are lots of ways to look at them. I look at them, God knows I've been a part of my own pet projects, but I prefer to look at investments and what's going to help people on a path. And that's free community college, or it's free tuition assistance. Importantly, a conversation that is not at this table is for the immigrant community. How powerful is it to help individuals learn English for purposes of obtaining their own dreams? And so I'm not opposed to targeted expenditures that are aimed at investments and making people better. I want to be clear about that. I want to just be considerate of the taxpayers that we're asking to give these resources for that cause.
Right, exactly.
Just many jurisdictions have had to, in effect, because of the ARPA funds that came from the federal government to support government operations over the last 2 years, have had to do effectively what you're describing, is to go to the public and say, what do we need to do for the community to survive over the next year? Now, probably most jurisdictions didn't do anything other than a normal process through a council, but there are some jurisdictions that have been extremely creative. And to our staff, there's opportunities. The best one I've heard about is the city and county of Denver, who actually went out and did exactly what you said. They hired linguists, they hired facilitators. I'm not suggesting we do this, but it is a fabulous model of aggressively going out into the community and educating and understanding at that moment in time what were the needs. And so I think we're at a different time because of all these collective experiences than if you had asked the question 3 years ago.
Was that about tax policy or spending?
Spending and COVID relief. So how to allocate those resources. But the tool could be used either way, or the processes are not necessarily that different.
But it sounds like there's a consensus that what we don't want to do is just have come one, come all, talk at us for 2 minutes, next.
I just think
that's of a discussion around
absolutely
a couple of ideas and trends and stuff, and have people react to stuff rather than say stuff necessarily.
But I wonder if we should still allow people to submit written comments or letters, or that, to me, that would be a good way, because then they'll, written comments require more thought and
I think it's de rigueur. We got to have the regular come in and do your 2 minutes, but I think everybody just has the regular suspects come in with their pre-scripted remarks. But if you don't do it, you're in trouble. I just think it's a both and again. I don't think it's an either or.
Can we replace 2 minute comments with submit written testimony?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think yes, that's
Yeah,
why I'm asking.
I mean, I just, I mean, David, you've been there. I mean, I just, the nightmares, you have these hearings and the same people come in, say the same things. You're not really learning anything. People just talking to one another, and you're not
Mayor, we
really,
have a rich tradition of what I call open mic night.
yeah.
It is.
Right.
It's a rich tradition, and it's one that, no good deed goes unwaterboarded. We've all signed up for this, and we're gonna have open mic night.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think that giving people a finished proposal in 30 or 60 days to comment thoughtfully, that way, no one's voice gets crowded out. People can take their time and be deliberative, and we should be equally respectful by each considering them into the larger final draft. I think we can do both.
Yeah. Well, I am actually saying we should do even more, but yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm talking about regular people.
I think we do need mixed methods of getting input from people across the district. I think we should probably have a conversation about how we want to deal with that input and what it will mean for our deliberations and how we weigh what comes from where. I think public comments are good, but also very skewed to certain folks who have the time and wherewithal to dig in and give depth of commentary on pretty complicated issues. And so anyway, I think we might want to talk to some folks who engage the public, engage communities as part of their job for how to do that well. I think we could bring someone in to help us do that. I don't think we have to rely on our own fabulous personas to do that, to get the kind of input we need. So someone can help us design that and think about some of the different ways we could get input.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, so we really are at, it's a teachable moment. We really seize the opportunity. What part of the research, in terms of, educating the public, what part of the research is not just statistical, but actual? So for example, one thing I've heard all the time is, say over the last 30 years, X percentage of companies that start in the district end up leaving the district. Okay, would it be a worthwhile exercise for us to go and actually interview the principals in these companies and ask them why, and do it in a controlled, as rigorous as possible way, but ask them why they left?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would get to answering the question, what part of the answer to the question of competitiveness. I don't know, what do people think of? Nick?
I think worthwhile. I think we should educate ourselves. I think the numbers and statistics you've seen are very huge. So there's a lot of people to talk to. Instead of guessing, we should go right to it.
I totally agree. I think it would be important and key for us to talk to them and find out exactly why they left, as opposed to assuming the reasons why they left.
Right.
We need to document.
Go ahead.
Exit interviews that people in business.
Yeah.
And employee leaves, you want to know why he left and what did he have good to say about the company, what's bad about the company. Get it all. There's some good sides to each story, I'm sure.
We're actually doing some of that research right now, and we hope to have do our first round of results in March or April. But that would mean that we could actually recommend to the commission at least part of our work, and who we spoke to. I think they should directly come and speak to you independent of our research, but I might be able to make the connections.
Yes, and are these people who left during the pandemic or pre-pandemic or both?
A combination, and
Combination,
also
okay.
folks who have grown their businesses in different ways
Okay.
than they
great.
would have done otherwise. Because location is one of the dimensions. It's also sort of like you might still keep your business here, but expand elsewhere.
Okay.
Where
Exactly. So it's a whole suite of questions that, to me, is at least interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about what parts of that you're already doing and where we might need to fill in.
Okay.
And I do think there are, it is not specific to the district, but there are bodies of research on why businesses grow, why businesses migrate. The weekend, one of the sessions that we have planned is around tax incentives and economic development, economic competition. And I think we should ground the DC specific results in the broader body of research about what makes an economy grow, what makes businesses thrive.
I mean, I
Some
think
really
that
interesting stuff there.
the interesting stuff about that research is it's not an absolute question of what attracts companies, what impacts this or that, but what are the conditions under which this, that, or the other works? Because stuff that didn't matter before the pandemic matters now. It's very much like the minimum wage debate. And I think that sort of like the shelf life of that knowledge is not particularly long. And therefore we need new research right now on that particular issue.
I think it'd be helpful in the same vein to look at the other side of the coin, say, get the heads of the bids from Capital Riverfront and NOMA in and say, why are people knocking down their doors to get in to two more cranes outside of National Park this year? So someone's moving in as well, and what are they attracted to?
Yeah, and that's the residential part, right? Because even though NOMA looks like a mix of residential and office, Navy Yards the same way, that's largely residential actually, especially Navy Yards.
No, and residents are taxpayers.
No, I totally agree. So
the
it
yield is
is,
pretty good.
it is interesting. So we did some research on this showing that proximity to amenities really matters even after the pandemic. And neighborhoods that have a mix of commercial and residential, in those neighborhoods, commercial properties retain their values better than elsewhere. But you can't really control for age. I mean, these are also neighborhoods that are relatively new. Maybe that's the reason. It's just too many conflating factors.
Yep.
You know, in June, the study came out that ranked Washington DC 150th as one of the best and worst run cities in the country. We came out 150th, but this was put together by 3 or 4 researchers. And I think it might be interesting for us because one or 2 of them are here locally in the city who did all the research, and they went into fiscal responsibility, et cetera. It may be interesting to have them come in as one of the speakers and talk to us about why we rank so low and which cities we should be talking to that are really well run and face these issues.
Judy, what was the research organization? Do you remember?
I was just trying to pull this up. I meant to slow before I got here. But one, I think, was at George Mason, and one was at Economic Institute here. But 2 of the 4 people were here in DC. And I just thought it might be interesting to have them come.
And what was the ranking
Remember that
based
we
on?
were 150 out of 150.
Yes. Here we go. One, sorry.
Sounds like an outlier to me,
And we may be in
but
but
don't
I
think
still
that was
think it'd be
great.
good.
It would be good to know the source because then I can at least assess the
I'll
quality.
give it to you for sure.
What were the evaluated?
Financial stability, education, health, safety, economy, and infrastructure.
Okay.
You were evaluating all of those?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
And I don't know if it's a big source.
I'm
I
gonna
don't know
put
if we
them.
should make any decisions based on this, but I think that the people who were involved could just be interesting to talk to.
Yeah.
And could point us to also which cities, because I'm sitting here trying to think which cities are really well run that we operate in, that would be great to talk to.
I think I looked at that. Is that the one that the city in Idaho, I think,
Yeah.
ranked #1?
Yes, there's a city in Idaho, and that's right, it's a city of 5 people. So it's really that's how I felt when I.
Well ran, 5 people.
But that's the point is that maybe they can help point us.
Yeah.
They've done
Yeah,
all this research.
wallet hub, and sometimes I miss the point. But
Right,
it's still worth looking at
but
it.
I
Yeah.
just think that people could be.
Okay. Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing, and you can confirm this, is that in both research and in engagement, that we need to be circumspect about the modality. So there's multiple modes that we're getting information. So I hear primary source information, interviewing CEOs, secondary sources that are reliable that we can consider, and the same for engagement. It's not your hot mic night as David said, but what are the multiple modes that we can exact that work? Maybe it's pulling from Denver's framework to see how they engaged or who does it right, and then replicating those so we can get the right feedback. Is what I'm hearing as a framework to adopt.
Okay, it's a good synopsis of it. So,
Does anyone have scheduling thoughts? I put out a suggestion about essentially holding not only the first Tuesday of each month, but another time, potentially the third Tuesday of the month at the same time. Becky had suggested maybe we could slide it to a 4:30 to 6:30 window. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation about exactly what is the right time slot for everyone, given other professional and family concerns.
This works for me.
This time slot works well, if I'm honest. It would make it, but I'm not obligated to take care of children, so I definitely don't want to weigh in with people who do. I'd like to give them the priority, but for me, 6:30 to 8:30 works.
it's good for everybody?
Will you continue having the virtual option?
Yeah, we'll work on getting this, continue to work on refining the technology. I think Mike's made. You know what, I missed a part of the meeting when I was supposed to invite, introduce Mike around. Mike Henman is our new senior research associate, joined a couple of weeks ago from the Ford School of the University of Michigan, Capitol Hill. It's great, anyway, great to have, but Mike has been digging into, and I think by next month meeting, we'll be able to do meetings that are both hybrid, and also, today we have a Zoom call going on and we have a YouTube stream going on. Be able to simplify that down to one piece of content. So we'll do that. We'll stick with this time. I mean, I have to say I'm impressed with 9 out of 10. I mean, Rashad hasn't been able to be either time, but he's after November. I think he said he'll be able to free up this time. So it's been
So
great
you
so far.
suggested meeting October 18th?
So no, I'm suggesting starting in November. We start with the first and third, and we'll get those invites sent out.
So long as we could keep the virtual option, because I do have a young kid with the total. pain in
Speak
the
up so
butt,
people can hear you on the microphone.
So long as we have the virtual option, I think it's fine.
Yes, Mike,
But I think
got three of those.
that the second meeting's gonna be
Hard to
primarily
get
virtual, right?
That was my thought. My thought was it'd be nice
I
for
like that. I think that would be a great choice.
us to be in person, to see each other live.
I like that too. I wonder if, I mean, we have this sort of nailed down. I wonder if for the second meeting, if we could do like a doodle or something to kind of get a sense of like where we get most people to be there.
Because in
And so
November,
we can do a little planning.
Yeah, my preference would be 4:30 to 6:30, but I can do either.
I have the 17:30 block for dinner for the tax commission.
All right.
November.
Dinner, yeah,
So I think doing another 15 might be hard.
I was gonna talk about that in a minute.
yeah.
So we wanted to have Mark Ein is offered, as I reported earlier, former Tax Revision Commission member, businessman in DC, is offered to sponsor a dinner. He originally wanted to have a dinner with some people in the Federal City Council and the Consul. But I thought, talking to Mark, that the Tax Revision Commission would be a great way, great subject matter to have a discussion with the Consul across ideological lines, try to build some common ground with the Consul after the election. So we, adjusting the lens for the district. So, someone more to the right, which in the district would be left everywhere else. But, different economists speak to the council people, the commission people, talk about these issues in an informal way, cognizant of and accommodating sunshine laws. Mark wanted to have it up at his place. He owns that Catherine Graham's old house up there on 28th and R. So now some people, and I understand, and I certainly can appreciate it, have some concern that if we had a meeting and it was up there or dinner up there, the optics wouldn't look good. My own personal view is we're relying on high earners basically produce 80% of the income. If we're going to say we don't want to have a meeting in a high income area of the city, to me, that's also problematic, but I'm not going to argue the point. So if people think we should have the session in another part of the city, that's fine too. I have my own. So would people rather us look for another venue? Just be done with it and look for another venue? Should I take silence as assent?
It's just dinner.
Yeah, it's dinner at somebody's home.
Right, okay. We'll find another
Is it
venue.
going, I mean, this is a public body that would be having dinner with the council to talk about tax policy, it sounds like. It seems like it should be viewable by the public if we're gonna do it that way. And it doesn't seem like I don't see why we wouldn't do it in more of a public space.
Well, now we're getting into my views of sunshine. I mean, it's basically, we're trying to have an informal discussion. We're not making any policy. We're not making any decisions. We're just trying to get to know one another. So if I went out on a date with somebody, I wouldn't invite the world to the date or scream the date. Maybe, I guess kids do now, but to me, we're just trying to, I don't know. I don't feel that, first of all, I don't know why I'm the only one talking. I don't know how do we operationalize? I guess there are ways we could operationalize trying to have a discussion. I mean, David, how did you guys do the retreats without it being open to the public? Not that I'm trying to exclude the public, although I am.
There has to be a concession for, human relationships. And, when you have an audience, and when everyone is mic'd up, then people put on their costumes, their red noses and floppy shoes, and they trot off to their sides, and they're not allowed to be human and really just talk with each other as people. And so, perhaps if there were guardrails there about what might or might not be on the agenda, that might reduce some concerns. But I always found it very helpful, especially with colleagues that maybe we didn't get along, for us to have these meetings. I had a bar in my office in the Wilson Building. I served more liquor there than, the Willard Hotel. Because when people, when people didn't get along, then I was often the reason. We would all get together and just talk as humans.
You never offered me a drink, David.
But it was a giant coulda, woulda, shoulda. My life is nothing but regrets at this point, Mayor. I should have. But the point is, I'm sensitive to Erica's concerns, and at the same time, it is important for us just to see each other as people and to talk about, mutual understanding without voting on a matter. That's what we have to be careful not to do, is to vote on matters. That's where the public has the highest right to know.
Mayor Williams, I think the lawyers can tell you whether or not it abides by the Sunshine Law or the Open Government Law. I believe it's whether a quorum is present, and there's a way of calling it training, I think, whereby you're exempt. But if it's the work of the commission itself.
No, we don't want that.
Well, then I guess it has to be done in such a way. I'll defer to you. I don't think it's a big deal. I would just say, in terms of removing people who find something to snipe at, the venue isn't worth it. And I just think finding a venue that is not a subject of a city paper article is just better than not.
Yeah, I get it. Which would be ironic. but yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
The state paper
Totally.
criticized
And it's not,
him.
it's not the area of town.
I
It's
got
just.
you.
It's Mark Ives paper.
Erica, you know, in our working group, and Erica, you're part of the working group, we can work this out in a way that
The thing I
addresses
think
all.
that'll be a challenge, and you and David know this better than anybody else. Elected officials are much better at talking than listening, and having them listen and engage with experts. I don't know. I haven't seen that happen, and so how to structure the evening, I think, is a challenge.
Well, I know, this is my example. I know when we started going on trips with the consul, relations got much better. We didn't talk about anything. We just were together talking. I don't know.
I know a really beautiful place east of the river,
There we go.
where people can meet and have a good time and get catered.
There you go.
No apparent evil or suspicious or nefarious means. We can have conversations.
Sounds like a plan.
Just, you let me know. I know somebody who can make it happen.
And David can bring the liquor.
Okay, we'll work that out. I think we have a sense of where everybody
Yeah, I
is.
would just say go back to your schedule, because we have that. At least.
I mean, just to kind of summarize, I think we have a consensus from everyone that we're going to try to, we may have some issues, but we're going to try to get off in this amount of runway, right? And we'll see where we are as we get rolling. That we're going to, you know, it's a both and we're going to try to, we're balancing both competitiveness and the issues of equity. It's not an either or, that we're not making decisions now. We'll make them as we are informed by the research. We're going to try to do some, as we call it, primary direct research with companies, with individuals that can help us and help inform our decisions, particularly around the competitiveness issue. That trying to be discreet so we don't end up trying to, you know, boil the ocean. Look at the connection between regulation and taxation, but recognizing the risks in terms of time and workload and all that. Do I have a kind of sense of where everybody is? Okay. All right.
Yes.
Good. And I think we got an agreement from everyone on the schedule in terms of when we meet and all that as well, right? Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Nick, are we gonna discuss those public input meetings that are on the calendar for next week and the following weeks?
Those have
They're
been
done.
canceled.
They've been canceled, great,
Yeah,
thank you.
We've had to migrate our emails to a new system, so we struggled to cancel those.
Okay,
So
thank you so
nobody-
much.
Everyone
Yeah.
removed those.
Oh, and one other thing, in terms of public input, there also was a consensus that we're gonna have open mic night. That's just what we do.
Mhm.
That David had a very good suggestion about, particularly with stakeholders and experts, involving them with notice, 60 to 90 days, or whatever the time may be, to involve them in our work, as well as exploring and researching exploring and researching a robust way to involve the broader public. Okay.
My disease is passing on to you.
Yeah.
Totally.
And we're all going to Rasan, right? We're going to bridges across the river. Okay,
Always,
good.
always welcome.
Okay.
All right.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mayor Williams.
Becky, for some reason, I still have those meetings on my calendar.
You have to delete them yourself.
You gotta delete it yourself.
She cannot, her system doesn't work. You just like,
I got it.
See you, David.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, Dr. Bye, David.